I believe was built in the early 1800s. And it used to be I believe it was a warden's cottage when they had prisoners here in the 1800s, a lot in this area. And then the thing just got let go for a number of years. When I first came up here in 1967, it was let go. And then my grandparents took over the place and rebuilt it in about 1969. And then they lived in that place. My grandfather died in 74. And then my grandma lived by herself. Ferna Eibel lived in that house until she died in 99. And now the house is owned by my auntie, my grandmother's daughter. And as I understand, it's heritage listed.
Cool. Let's get a little bit of a look in here. So this is the cottage. Carrington Cottage. You heard the story? Now you see the place. It was an old warden's place. Looks like it's built with Besser bricks or some kind of bricks. Now it looks like a fisherman's cottage. They've got the nipper pump there, probably catch nippers, probably go out fishing for whiting off the banks of the bay here. And we can see remnants of an old boat shed and an old wharf there. Simon's just showing us around Carrington here today. We've met his auntie and met John, his son Andrew, and now we're going out to look at a little stone wall, some sort of breakwater for the little bay, little slipway, little wharf, little harbour here.
Oh, this house is so nice.
Yeah, that's what's named house.
What happened?
Remember how he said he'd take
What's the story of this house here?
So this house was my auntie Ine's house.
Yeah.
Right. And she married a guy named White who used to own all this land, and even the island out the front he owned.
Yeah.
Which that island's only recently been sold in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Now it's inhabited. Where for many years it was uninhabited.
Yeah.
So this house here was my Ine Racknick's house, and she sold it probably about 10 years ago to her nephew, Richard Hughes, and he still lives there. And that house is where we've had about 3 or 4 different family members live in. That's where Ine, my grand auntie, lived. That was the house. She moved into there. She sold that house, moved into there, and she died this year, early this year. You got North Arm Cove over the other side there?
Soldiers Point straight ahead. North Arm Cove is to the left.
Straight there.
Out there. Oh, North Arm Cove. And that goes up to where?
No, North Arm Cove, if you keep following it round,
Yeah.
it goes to Bundabar, and eventually if you keep following it, you get to Windawappa.
Oh, you go in Tea Gardens all the way around there.
All the way around, yeah.
Ah, so that's one side of the bay and that's the other side of the bay.
So there's Nelson's Bay.
Yeah.
If you follow around the corner, that'll be Shoal Bay, Nelson's Bay.
Yeah.
On the other side is Hawk's Nest. So to get to Hawk's Nest from here, as you know, you get back on the highway.
Yeah.
And the highway goes that way and then comes back in towards.
Yeah. And so you can go that way to get to Tea Gardens that way, or all that way.
By boat if you wanted to.
Yeah. Okay. How long would it take you by boat?
Oh, it depends what you had, but. You just had a little 10 horsepower. Probably.
And here we go, the old oyster farmers. And this is not.
So this is Lyle's.
This is not really your side of the family anymore.
No, this is,
That's the Lyle family, and that's a panelled house.
that's been there forever. That house.
And this is all their handiwork.
It's gone though.
It's gone to the pack a bit.
Well,
They're not using it
sorry?
anymore.
I'm not going to the tree.
Oh, I wouldn't. I wouldn't. There used to be one of those trees right in front of the island.
Yeah.
You used to get Never got any snapper, but used to get red bream.
Are we allowed to climb this
Yeah.
trail there?
But that's where I used to do all my fishing as a kid, on that jetty. So I used to go out to about
Yeah.
probably.
Tahlee House.
Yeah, you're doing the tour, are you?
No, I'm not.
You-
I'm actually
I
getting
thought you were a
toured.
tour guide.
No.
Oh, okay. You're showing us through. This is Tahlee House. Okay, let's have a look
You
inside.
can show us the wall.
This is
And,
the dining area.
Oh,
And
wow.
they actually have 3 layers of this wall. They have
Wow.
outside, then they have concrete, and inside there they actually have oyster shells.
Oyster shells.
Crushed up oyster shells.
I love oysters. We're
Yeah,
having
you
some
wouldn't really
oysters.
want to eat the shells.
And up here we got some very old paintings, and we got an old record player, pianola, whatever you call
This
it.
is the dining area.
Wow.
Look at those.
They've got some canopies. We've come early. We've surprised them. We've sprung it on them. We've brought Judy up here, and we've got Terry. We've got Richard trying to get the heater going. It's usually got a. What about regulator? Has it got a regulator on it?
Yeah, it's turned on.
It's on.
You don't film me yet.
We've sprung it on you, Kerry. We sprung it on Judy first, and now we've sprung it on you.
I think like a drama together, which is so terrible.
I've got a really good idea. Why don't we make
Have a
a
little-
start while Kerry's just putting the final touches to the eating. If you want to have a seat.
I might need to bring some more stuff.
Yeah, you will.
Oh really? Oh, so sweet of you.
Park yourselves. And if you want to do so and turn the chair.
Bodley's house. The Bodleys' little nook of the woods.
Doing good. And there'll be a reward. Reward.
David, you should
You know, when someone does something really bad and then someone does something really good and you get something for it, that's it. So you're doing the good bit. What we'll do is we'll kick off for a few minutes and then we'll have a little time out so that we can eat these goodies. But welcome to Tahlee. Now, who has never been here before? Never, ever.
Okay.
In the house.
I've been here a lot, but never in the buildings.
I have never been to the Okay. Judy's actually been here before there was dirt. Yeah. Before dirt. Yeah. Before dirt existed, there was Judy.
1826.
1826, yep.
Oh,
Which is when. Yeah, some bits are really, really well preserved. With some they
I'm
do.
not feeling it today.
No.
But I couldn't miss out on seeing Simon and Natalie. When
Exactly.
they're up here. Didn't see how it's
And Luke and Alana.
and Luke too, because he gave me a big colour down there. I couldn't even lift my head. It is.
He keeps it high, doesn't he?
I was looking straight ahead, expecting it to be there.
All right. Now, 1826 has been bandied around a little bit flippantly. However, 1826 is very significant because that's when this place was first settled, white settlement, by the Australian Agricultural Company. Who's heard of the AA Company?
Now we are.
Only
Yes.
from the pamphlets, only from the Tahlee pamphlets.
Yeah, the Australian Agricultural Company was a company formed as an act of the British Parliament in 1824, and a group of members of the British aristocracy, members of the House of Lords, banded together with some investors, and they invested £1 million. Now, if you think of in today's dollar terms, that's like a truckload. That's several truckloads of money. And so £1 million was invested in order to send a group of people out here, headed up by a guy by the name of Robert Dawson, and he was to grow merino sheep, shear the wool, and send the wool back to England and Europe, and they were going to sell the wool there and make a fortune. That was the plan. And they chose this man, Robert Dawson, to head up the whole project, and he came out here. They settled in Sydney. They bought some merino sheep from England and France with them, and some cattle and some horses and various other things. and some people. They settled in Camden, just in Western Sydney. Now, Camden was in the news just recently because they wanted to put a Muslim school there. Remember? Yeah, that's where they settled. And they came up, and with some assistance from one of the government surveyors, they selected some land, and they were granted 1 million acres. So 1 million pounds was invested. They were granted 1 million acres of land. And it started right here. And why was it chosen? Why was this land chosen? Oh, first of all, does anyone know, you guys been up to Tahlee?
Yeah.
Fair drive, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, their land went up to Tahlee.
Yeah.
Been to Gloucester.
Yeah.
Fairway inland, went out to Gloucester. Dungog and Clarencetown.
Yeah.
Now where the Johns family lived.
Yep.
To there, and then back along the Karoo River to here. That was their front yard. Okay,
Wow.
1 million acres. And the reason this point here was selected was because this river here gave them access to a lot of that land. So there were no roads in those days, and the airlines was loud. The land was terrible. So the river was very important, as was access to the ocean, so they could sail back to England and Europe with the wool. Okay. Now they made a major decision. This was the land. But the thing they didn't do was check to see whether it was the right sort of land and right sort of climate for the sheep. Sheep didn't like it. They didn't talk to the sheep. And have you heard of foot rot? Sheep got foot rot. This land, this area was just too wet. So ultimately they went further west, and they went out to places like Burrell and Stroud initially, but then further west they went to Tamworth, which is much drier and flatter. And then later on they got out of sheep, largely, and mainly into beef cattle. Now today that company, the Australian Agricultural Company that started right here in 1826, is the world's biggest producer of beef cattle. But most of their land, if you have a look at that map right there, you'll see Western Queensland and Northern Territory, you'll see the dark green bits.
Yeah.
That's their current land holdings, or most of their current land holdings. And they currently have, they started out with how big was their first property?
1 million acres.
1 million acres. Now they have 20 million acres.
Wow.
So that's like inflation big time. Now they are the second biggest private landholders in all of Australia. Anyone here not born in Australia?
Yeah, me.
Where were you born?
Mauritius.
Well, a lot bigger than Mauritius. I've been to Mauritius.
Have you? Lucky you.
The plane landed. Then it took off again.
And Michael, you weren't born there either.
Born? The Bahamas, bigger than the Bahamas. So there you go. As I say, second biggest, they say the world's biggest, Australia's biggest commercially viable private landholder. They do own a little bit of land down in Tasmania now that they still have merino sheep on. Now I would have thought it was too wet here, it'd be too wet there, but they've still got sheep down there. Maybe they've got boots on, I don't know. But they also...
Too cold for the foot rot.
Yeah, maybe, frozen foot. Yeah. But they own a little bit of land just over here. They didn't even know they owned it until recently.
Oh.
Tiny patch of land. Time permits, I'll tell you that story. Fascinating story about that little bit of land. Maybe we'll get to there. So what we're going to do is we're going from here, after we've had a scoff, we're going into that room there. We'll spend a few minutes in there, then we'll go out onto the veranda. We won't do the walk down to the boat harbour, because I think you guys have been there.
We just did that.
You've just done it.
Yeah.
Been there, done that. Right, so I'll tell you a little bit about the history of that. What we'll then do is we'll go to the cannon, tell you a little bit about the cannon, and I'm going to summarise everything because I know you guys have got to go. So I'm going to do that. Keep the skates on.
3:30, probably 3:45 kind of thing.
These guys got to go
They'll
too.
be back,
Yeah.
go back by 5,
She's got
so
to be. She's got to be at work by 5. So.
Alright.
so 3:45 probably.
All right, well, we'll keep our skates
Yeah.
on. Then, time permitting, we'll go into the chapel, show you the PowerPoint presentation, and then we'll just take it as it comes from there.
Right.
Right, now, a couple little bit of background information about us. People often say to us, what church are you from? Well, we're not from any particular church at all. We're from a whole range of different churches, Uniting, Baptist, Presbyterian. I go to a Pentecostal church down in Newcastle. So a lot of people think, oh, Tahlee Bible College, it's run by a church. It's not. Okay? Second question that people often ask is, there's usually 3 on these tours, and we have this place packed for a tour, don't we, Jude?
Yeah.
We get 55 people in here.
Sometimes we have them out on the veranda as well in the summertime.
Your bus loads.
We do. Yeah, it's a bus load coming on Tuesday. We've got 8 booked in August, etc., etc. And invariably 3 questions get asked. First one is, what church are you from? I've answered that one. Second one is, what does Tahlee mean? Tahlee is an Aboriginal word. It has 2 meanings. It means above the water. We'd agree on that. We're all above the water. Second thing is protected from the wind. I doubt that. I really have a problem with the protected from the wind bit.
Especially when it got under the roof here and it's
Maybe it was wishful thinking when they
Maybe,
moved
well, I've
here.
got a theory, and that is that the Aboriginal man who came up with that name was a very still day, or he was standing behind a very big tree. One of the 2. And so that's what Tahlee means. The third question that people often ask us is, you're all volunteers. Now, Judy gets paid a fortune for what she does. We're all volunteers. No one gets paid.
When am I getting it, Rich?
Yeah, that's it. Stirring up treasure, girl.
You get a cream hand.
We don't get paid a cent for what we do. And people sometimes often say, why do you do that? And so when enough people asked us that, we decided what we're going to do is we'll give the opportunity to, one of the staff will tell their story as to why they are here to do that. I don't know that we'll have time for that today, but we'll see how we go. All right, so they're the 3 questions. We clear on all those?
Yep.
Let's eat.
Yeah.
Good on you.
Tell us about Tim Fisher.
Tim Fisher. And so he said, I'm on a really strict time frame. He said, I've got 10 minutes, that's all. He loved the place so much he stayed an hour. And he presented us with a copy of that poster. He is now the Minister to the Vatican. He's no longer, he was on the board of the Australian Cultural Company, but now he's not. Okay, so that's where this poster came from. And as I say, that's the current land holdings of the AA Company. Now, this place, Simon, you were mentioning about Rising Dam.
Yeah.
When this wall was rendered, because this particular house burnt down in the mid-1800s, there was a fire, the house burnt down. And it was restored later on by a fellow by the name of, now you're going to be tested on this, Robert Hoddle Dryburgh White. Who can say that?
Robert Hoddle Dryburgh White.
Very good. R.H.D. White. He restored this house from ruins. It was in ruins from, Judy, you were here in those days. How long was it in ruins for? 25 years.
Back in the 80s, late 80s.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Yes,
I've gone away then.
after the house burnt down, it lay ruins for 25 years, and then this man, what was his name again?
Whitey.
Whitey.
Robert
Something
Hoddle
like
Dryburgh.
Dryburgh White.
R.H.D. White. He
That's right,
rebuilt
his
it.
father.
And when he rebuilt it, he added that wing. This house didn't have that wing up down there. And as soon as we've finished our cups of tea and coffee, we're going in there, and I'll show you some stuff in there. Now, you've all got joggers and thongs on, that's all right?
Mm-hmm.
Because on the floor in there is this beautiful soft timber floor made out of a timber called beech. And the timber came from west of Taree, out that way. And it's a soft floor that you, like dance floors are made out of. So if you feel like dancing, that'd be why. So we go in there and we'll tell you a little bit about that. I really like that building, that part of the building. It's gorgeous, isn't it, Jude?
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. So we're trying to cram as much as we can in for you in a short space of time.
It was a picture. I really enjoyed his message. He talked about holidays.
What? We're here at Tabley and Bodley.
It's supposed to be candid. David, show me what you've got.
He's a teacher. He was a teacher.
Delish.
But if he's that adamant,
Rachel!
what is there, a power struggle going on or something? It sounds like he's got some other agenda, like he wants to control or something. Teachers, that's what we want to be, teachers, to have power, isn't it?
Oh,
It's
no.
Michael, Rachel, Alex, David, Luke and Elena having afternoon tea. I'm going to get in trouble for bad photography, so
By this fellow here, Robert Hoddle Dryburgh White.
Yeah.
This fireplace was added, and these 3 pieces of marble on the bottom here look as though they're a perfect match. They were given by a lady on a tour last year. And they're almost identical in colour and almost a perfect fit, about this much difference.
Wow, they were from Italy. They were imported.
Well, she doesn't know where she got it from, but she lived in Merewether and she said, I've got them, would you like them? And so when I put them down in place, they were about this far out of being perfect.
They'd be cut from the same quarry.
Possibly. Okay, let's keep telling the stories. Who likes this room?
Yes, please. We'll camp here.
Well, we can thank this man here for it. His name was, what is it?
Robert
something.
Dryberg.
Whitey.
Ronald Dryberg White. I think just remember right-hand drive White. He had a son. His name was Anti-Locking Braking System White. That's a boy. Yeah. ABS stands for Alfred Bryant Stewart White. Brewer. Alfred Brewer White stockbroker. As I say, he moved down to Sydney and he ultimately started his stockbroking company. And I think it's true to say, Judy, that his first wife wasn't a great lover of coming away to the country life. She was more of a city girl. And consequently, his time up here wasn't as much as him. ABS loved Tahlee, absolutely loved it. But through work considerations and the fact that his wife wasn't all that keen on coming up, his time up here wasn't as great as he'd have liked. There's a fellow by the name of Godfrey Theobald. Anyone ever heard of Godfrey Theobald? Okay, well, Godfrey Theobald was a man in charge of a ministry called the Gospel Fishermen. And their role was to travel around, particularly country New South Wales, to country towns, and share with the people about having a personal relationship with Jesus Christ as Lord and Saviour. That's what they did. They weren't so much about religion, but relationship with the Saviour. And so in their travels, and these travels particularly just during and just after the Second World War, they often encountered situations where kids, not unlike the ages of you kids, who were not so much in loving families and they were in crisis. And they'd never been out of their town. Today we tend to travel a lot more, but in those days they didn't. And this recurring theme of kids in trouble, but never being away from their town, never been to the ocean, never seen the sea. And part of the heart of Godfrey Theobald was to have a facility where he could invite people to come and have holidays. And so they started looking for a property in and around the Newcastle area because they'd been based in Newcastle. Couldn't find an appropriate property. Ultimately they got on to Tanilba House, just across the bay over here. And in Tanilba House, they had a lovely property, but there wasn't sufficient land. And so on one occasion, Godfrey and his wife got into a hired launch and went exploring. And they saw the boat harbour over here, went out, got to the boat harbour, pulled up, and almost immediately, as soon as they put foot on the ground here, they knew that this was the place they'd been searching for. So they came up to look in Tahlee House, peered through the windows, all shut up, all closed, there's no one here, and they saw the land and the buildings, and they thought, oh, it was like going to heaven. They just said, this is the place. And so they inquired about who owned the property and got an address for ABS White and wrote to him in Sydney. And the request was basically, we would like some land and some buildings. Would you consider renting, leasing some of the land and buildings? And initially he said no, but soon after he changed his mind. And apparently because the church that he was a board member of, they were encountering similar problems. So he's probably in his mind put the two together and decided to have a meeting with Godfrey Theobald. And out of that meeting came an agreement for £100 a year. They would lease the land and some buildings, about 3 buildings. Right, Judy?
Yeah. The other building there and the one on the water. No, only 2.
2 buildings. And the dining room,
Over there.
the use of.
Yeah, all of
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
All of that building there.
Yeah. So this went on from 1949 to 1959. ABS had moved back here, he married Ine. They could see first-hand experience of these hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kids who would come here, and he would observe their lives being transformed. They would have an encounter with the risen Christ. They would have an experience of being loved by people. They weren't judged, they were just loved and accepted for who they were. And so each year when the anniversary of the lease agreement came up, and they would scrape together the £100 and give it to ABS, and he would take it. He was retired at this stage, quite a wealthy man. He would take the money. He didn't necessarily need the money, but that was the agreement. And so, but invariably, after seeing these lives change, he would often give the money back, accompanied by a statement that said, "I like what I see you people doing. Keep on doing it." And that's continued all of this time. We celebrate 60 years this year of settlement here. And in 1959, ABS came to the point of saying, "I don't need this property anymore. It's too big for me. I'm an elderly man. I'm going to move just down the road to that beautiful little village of Carrington, where he and Eno would live there." That was in 1959. He died in 1962, and he's buried in the cemetery just outside here. But when he decided to sell, he called Godfrey to him and he said, "I've made a decision. I'm going to sell this property, and I would like to give you first option to buy it." And Godfrey said, basically, "Wonderful. How much?" He said, £8,000. Now, he might as well have said £8 million because the ministry had no money. They scraped together £100 a year. 8,000 was just almost beyond belief. But Godfrey said, "Look, I won't delay our answer to you for long. I'll go back to my people and we'll pray." And they did. They prayed and felt overwhelmingly that God had brought them here, called them to this place, and in faith they would commit to buying an £8,000 property with no money. There's a scripture that says, "He who has no money, come and buy." And so they entered into that agreement. Now, a lot of people would look at that and go, "That's a bit foolish. That's almost illegal."
I'm going to sit down, sorry.
But a lot of people would look at it and say, "What an incredible step of faith." Well, this is what happened. Some people started pledging little bits of money. They started pledging £2 and £5 and £10. That wasn't much, but at least it was a start in that direction, wasn't it? And so one couple came forward. They lived over on the bay over here, and they came forward and they said, "Look, we don't have any money, but we're in line for some inheritance money. We don't know when it's coming. The solicitors aren't able to tell us that, but we believe that it's going to be somewhere between £200 and £250. When it comes, we're pledging it for the purchase of Tahlee." And Godfrey would have said, "Well, thank you very much." Well, the time came when it was necessary for settlement to take place, and the people had turned up, and in their hands they had a bank cheque. That bank cheque wasn't for £200 or £250, but it was £5,000, and they gave it. And Godfrey reportedly said, "Well, look, you don't have to give it all. It's a wonderful thing, but you don't have to give it all." And they said, "Yes, we do. We pledged it. We have to honour our word. It's important to honour your word." And so just recently, 18 months ago, we had to have this property valued for insurance purposes. And it was valued between $12 and $15 million. How faithful is God? What an amazing provision. And so the place has been debt-free. Now, we have a neighbour just over here, multi-millionaire. And he wants Tahlee. He wants to develop his property next door. He wants to put 5-star, multi-million-dollar accommodation on it. Only the rich and famous would get in. That's not our heart. Our heart is to share with anyone and everyone. Come in and experience the splendour and the magnificence of this place. And part of the reason he wants this property, and he's waiting for us to fall flat on our faces and fail, and he'll write a cheque. Gated community, only the rich and famous get in. But we have our own sewage system, our own water supply. We have well over 1 million litres of water in storage, and he needs it in order to develop next door. So he's waiting for us to fail. And I would say to you, watch this space. It's going to be fascinating how it all works out, because he wants our property, we want his property. So what we can do next door is we can have hundreds and hundreds of kids, just like 50 and 60 years ago, coming in and having life-changing experiences, just like they've done a few weeks ago. And we have lots and lots of kids coming here, and they experience the living Christ, and their lives are transformed. So that's a little bit of the history of how this property came to be in the hands of the ministry and has been for now 50 years. We celebrate that in October, long weekend in October, and there'll be hundreds of people come here. You'd be here, Jude, wouldn't you? You'll be here. Yeah, absolutely.
Sitting right here.
Now, a lot of the things that you see here, this furniture, has been gifted. This piece right here was left to us by Eno. That piece there. Different pieces of artwork around.
Is that in her house before?
Jude?
Yes, it was right there. I actually found that in her after she
That's
died.
Ina's husband.
Oh.
Is it?
That's how great auntie's husband.
She
She was his housewife and they fell in love.
That's
Painting.
the painting just outside. Anyway, I
Because
thought.
I remember seeing it in the big room in the house.
What we've endeavoured to do is to try and make the place as authentic as we can. Obviously the lounge suites aren't that era, but as we add little bits and pieces, we try to make it look more and more authentic. Some people asked us on a tour one day about a year or so back, someone said, now you'll hear very shortly about Sir William Edward Parry, Captain William Edward Parry, and he was a naval commander. And when they came out in end of 1829, his wife was very pregnant. She was actually having twins, but she didn't know it at the time. And the twins were born in Government House down in Sydney. They were guests of the Governor of New South Wales, Governor Darling. And his wife, Lady Eliza Darling, delivered the twins. And someone looked up there and said, are these the twins when they got older? And I said, I certainly hope not, because one of them was a boy. I don't know who they are. Jude, you?
No, it's a very nice, it's supposed to be a print, I believe, but Eno said it was a painting. Definitely a painting.
It looks more like a print, but anyway, be that as it may, it's up on the wall. We don't know who this gentleman up here is, but there are obviously some authentic pieces on this end.
Actually, my place is one of these. We're our cottage. Yeah, the one at the front.
Mm. But isn't it a gorgeous building?
Mm.
What we're going to do now, folks, unless you have any questions, we're going down through these steps. Hopefully the door is open in there and we'll go through some of the bedrooms. As you go out, look at the pay for them.
Can you show us? Say that again. What happened?
These lights here. Did ABS pay for them or did he nick them?
The lights came from the Australian Stock Exchange.
I doubt he would nick anything.
No.
Where was the Stock Exchange? Down in Circular Quay, or was it the one in Bond Street? There's one in Bond Street.
More likely to be Bond Street, I would think.
Yeah,
I'd say Bond Street.
Bond Street.
I'd say, in fact, that's where the name came from, Bond Street. They issued bonds in those days.
Oh, okay.
Now, folks, what I'll do, I'll come back to this door here and open up from the other side.
There's from the Stock Exchange, where Whitey got this nice sort of candelabras, whatever they are. Here we go, we're still at Tahlee House. We look at some of the beds and
Just for you, Jeff. It's
Yeah.
just amazing. Just take you straight down the harbour.
yeah. Look at that, eh, Port Stephens.
It's just so awesome.
It is. And the flowers have all come out.
That'd be
The commode.
Bit nice, isn't it?
Magnificent. Is this original?
The toilet was
We
made
don't know
all the
about
way
this
down
bed.
to
I don't think
When I
this
was a
one's
kid,
original.
we used to have a potty
The
on
one
there, I
next
remember.
door is. But this one here converts quite quickly
Into a seat.
to what you might think is a blanket box, but it is a thunder box. And someone on a tour just recently said to me, you know the term to put your foot in it?
That's.
Do you know where it came from?
Oh no, I don't want to hear.
When you get out of
Yeah,
bed.
you do. It's a good story. You want to hear
Go
it?
on, go on.
Well, the gazunda, like one over there,
Oh, yes.
they put it gazunda, it goes under the
Chamber
bed.
pot.
Yeah, because
Chamber pot, yeah. So someone forgot to slide it back in and they got out next morning and put their foot in
Put
it.
in it.
That's where that saying comes from.
Oh, yuck.
That's ABS.
Oh, I like that. That's
Are you
great.
serious?
No,
Don't tell me.
that is serious. Look at,
Alex,
Wow.
Alex, have you seen the
Renee asked me, she said, if I got the picture of Whitey on the dog up there, and she says,
Wow, I didn't
yeah.
know
And
that.
every time I walk in here, I just look at that.
I
I'll
heard,
stand from there, look at the dog for like 5 seconds, just
I
stare
heard
at
that
the
they may have to
There's another dog over there.
empty that out last
Yeah,
time.
did you see that?
Because I've actually been on this tour.
Look at the dress. Look at these
That's like a really big next door, Richard.
There was, like,
I'm not really interested in dresses. I like thunderboxes better.
Who did you help?
The boyfriend.
This is an original bed. It was actually made up of a bed head and a foot. That's right, Judy? It was 2 beds combined into one because one part of it was damaged. But there's a picture
No,
of...
that was actually, that's a double bed
who's that?
that was
That's
in
not-
Whitey's room.
Okay.
Whitey used to sleep in that
So
bed.
that's not this. It's
It's
very
not
much
that,
like
we
it.
don't know where that one is. It's not, it hasn't been, what
These
has
are-
been
these are
taken
originals,
off
Natalie?
this bed
These are the
here
originals.
is the big thing like this.
The
that
original
came
bed.
out.
Judy used to sleep on
Okay.
them.
It was
Judy
made
used
of
to
this
sleep
stuff
on
and
it.
it came out with the mosquito
talking about-
there.
Oh, sorry.
That?
Judy's a
Do you know who
living
that is,
treasure.
Judy?
She is.
Robert Hoddle.
No, look at that shirt. It's wrong.
It looks like the same picture as in there.
I've had a look closely
Look at the
and
shirt.
the hair's different, the nose is different.
But it's a portrait, I think.
So it's an
It's a
artist
painting.
impression.
It's an
Yeah, it's
an artist
like-
impression.
It's the equivalent of airbrushing now.
I thought it was, and then I looked very closely between the two, and I thought the features are very different.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
similar, but still quite different.
He looks a little bit more portly
That's one of
there
his
too.
sisters. That one.
Do you know her name?
Lily.
Lily.
Lillian. But Lily White sounds better, doesn't it?
Oh, that's
He looks good looking.
She does look really white.
She's like a pasty vampire lady.
So do you know who that gentleman on the right is?
I thought it was a brother. There's another brother. You know the picture with everybody sitting along the front of the house? There's 2 brothers there. So he would have had 3 brothers. And I believe that could be one. And
Judy, this piece here, was that in Ine's house ever?
no,
I'm hoping Judy will know.
Nanny had one similar, didn't she?
she's got one similar, the one
Yeah.
I've got at home.
Yeah, it's similar. Actually, the one you got.
So you
at
think
home-
Ine, that was one of Ine's?
That's a brother.
I've just seen a piece. Ine, I don't know, it might be fair enough. I think my grandmother had a similar piece, but it might be a print of the same thing.
No, it's not.
Do you know who the
I can't remember that at all. It looks like an old one.
do you know who the people are on that in those photos on those portraits on?
No.
How about you?
I'm the one
Sorry.
who was your mum. Oh.
We're going out through those doors, guys, if you want to open up.
Open the door, Luke, please. Here we are. Have you seen that? They're like little Bible. Open it up.
Wow.
It's incredible, isn't it? Stand next to it, see how big it is compared to you.
It's called a bignonia.
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 We have a photograph on the
Oh, is it?
PowerPoint presentation that you'll see shortly, and ABS, as a young man, was standing just over there with a rifle on his shoulder. This is in the background. So that's-
Shooting the wallabies?
Well, he was aiming kind of out to sea by the angle of the barrel. I don't know what he was doing, maybe just having a pose or something, but this was in the background and quite well established, so the tree's got to be well over 100. Huddle together for body warmth. What we can see here is the funnelling in of Port Stephens around the corner to the entrance of the Karoo River. So again, just to understand why they chose the land, position of the land. The boat harbour was built at the same time as the construction of Tahlee House, 1826, and it was constructed under the oversight of a man by the name of Daniel Ivy. He was a Cornish stonemason. He was brought out here to build stone structures, and that was his first project. He used convict labour. He had an assistant, a fellow by the name of Mr. William Jones, and they had two little cottages on the right-hand side of the boat harbour, and they lived there with each had a family. And so they're little one-bedroom places, nothing like the luxury that we encounter today. Now, off the other end,
left of those cottages, is there?
there's nothing left of them. We found out just recently where they were in relation to a possible reconstruction at some stage down the future. Yep.
What's that thing?
That thing is a tea urn, I would guess. You wouldn't drink a cup of tea out of that, would you?
That's what you heat water in.
Yeah, maybe.
That's where the road from Tarua used to come through,
Yeah.
where we used to come.
Also, what you've got right here.
Is that like an actual
Is-
pipe? I mean, like.
No, it's just brought here recently. This here is a trapdoor.
What's
No,
that?
it's up.
Is it cellar?
Wine cellar, I believe.
Oh, can you come and look?
Very quickly we can have a look.
Well, I'm excited.
And you can't go
Oh, I'm
down.
really excited now. Oh, can we out of the way for our dinner?
I've never seen
Make way for the
that
camera.
before in real life. Oh, that is so cool.
Wow.
I want to go down there. What it said, beware of giant rats, snakes, and elephants. And at your own risk. Watch your head. I wonder who wrote that.
Down to the
I can tell you
dungeon.
who wrote that. Man by the name of David Bye. David Bye wrote that. He made this, see, with this branch on it, so it works on a balance
It's a
weight.
counterbalance.
Yeah.
Are there actually...
And did they store food under there as well, probably, didn't they?
And elephants.
They
Do
would
they
have
store
stored
food under there?
as
No,
well.
it's just a wine cellar.
The
We don't
best
use it.
wine.
We don't use
The
it
best
for
wine?
any purpose right now. But we'll get it all cleaned out so that.
But before refrigeration days, they could have used it to store meat and all sorts of things.
No, they had a separate underground, in-ground meat hanging
Do they?
facility.
Okay.
Yeah. It's down near the boat harbour, in the side of the hill. Now, these steps.
Like walls that you can inside around. So someone tries to attack us.
These steps have just been restored. We get some government funding, but we have to match it dollar for dollar.
I noticed the ones down the front that's been done too.
That's the old road to Karua down there.
The
See, there's a
boat harbour has
gate
just
there.
been restored.
Is that funding has to be reapplied for every year?
Oh no, you've got to use it within a time frame. You don't.
And do you have to make sure it's done sort of true to the,
Yeah, they,
just true to the style, or do you try to use the same materials and everything?
we endeavour to. A lot of the bricks here were original bricks.
Okay.
We had to mix them up with some new ones because of decay.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
But the restoration of the boat harbour was done with original material. The boat shed, we had to build a brand new boat shed because the original one was termite eaten and had to be pulled down.
And what's that made out of, the new boat shed?
Buildings, but also for the landscaping and also the vegetation. He introduced species of plants from different parts of the world. Can anyone see the Asian influence?
Yeah, the ninja forest.
Yeah. It's infested with,
That's what I'm
infested with ticks.
Is it really?
Every year we try and thin it out a little bit, but it is preserved by state significance so that they will stay.
Right, so as much as you'd like to maybe get rid of it.
Yeah, I'd like to put this massive porthole there so you can see through the water. Can't quite do that. The sea osprey's nest up here.
Yeah, we saw that.
Yeah, there's a hawk's nest in that tree just there. You'll see it from down the other end.
Oh, okay. One of the other pines.
The osprey are magnificent creatures there.
Because they went
Every day they
But I used to
hunt
come
down
up in
about-
the moonlight and walk down here and sit down the dark.
She would,
You'll have
did
to
she
come back
actually live
another
up
time.
here?
Every day they fish down the slippery dip in the swimming
How long
pool.
did she live
I
up
want to
here?
look at the rest of the house because there's actually
Well, I think time's going to beat us because we've got the PowerPoint presentation. That's where Kerry sleeps and her husband.
Oh, 5:30, dear.
How beautiful.
Oh, Dad, I think I got it.
Nice old room.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, that's the
40 kilos, careful, you'll hurt yourself.
for a couple of years we stayed.
Could you lift it? Go, Alex, you got it.
I'll try.
That's a
I'm lifting it out of the hole before. I've tried it.
Wrong.
That's what they put on the convict legs, wasn't it?
Come out.
This is what you do.
How hard is it to get it up in there then?
Yeah, that'd be good for
No,
your
you don't
quads.
put it up in there.
No, you hurt your back, darling. End up with permanent back
Do
injury.
you think that would fly through the air very well with that big handle hanging off it?
No, like without a handle. No,
I've got to
wouldn't
make
fit
a very
in the
quick
nozzle.
call to tell the guy to get ready for the PowerPoint presentation.
Did they ever shoot this cannon at someone?
3 o'clock. What's the PowerPoint?
Oh, hang on.
That's a presentation of PowerPoints.
Mum, I can lift that 40 kilos.
How much is it?
40 kilos.
Okay, see if you can lift it with your foot like Richard.
Okay, do you want to hear about the... Let me ring this a couple of times so we get the message. Cannon was built in England towards the end of the 18th century.
19.
No. 1790. And that is not a date.
That is the range.
No, it is the weight of the cannon. It stands for 1100 weight, 2 quarters and 12 pounds.
So how much would that be in kilos?
Lots.
Like how many? About?
1100 weight. That's about a ton, isn't it? 1 ton.
112 pound in 100 weight.
Sorry, 112
112
pound.
pound in 100 weight.
Right.
So that's, yeah, it'd be about probably a ton and a half,
Yeah.
something like that. It was made by a company called the Walker Cannon Company in England. King George III,
King George.
during his era. This batch number, and these are site markings. Now this cannon was fired in 1976, 150 years from settlement of Tahlee. Add 150 to 1826 and you get 1976, yeah?
Was it fired at something?
Yeah. The sky.
Oh, like a ship
It
or
was
something?
full, no, it was full of cloth cut into strips. Some gunpowder put in here, the wick lit. Boom.
So
That building down
it
there.
was just, it didn't fire anything.
What's
It just
that?
rained.
Should have put a cannonball in there. What's that?
So
Don't know.
there's people that do that.
Yeah.
Know how to do that.
Yeah. It was fired in 1976 also to commemorate the opening of that building down there, which was taken apart piece by piece from the Greta Army barracks after the Second World War and was part of the migrant camp accommodation. So, an amazing story that when Godfrey went out to bid on that building, to have it put there, he there was another couple, another 2 guys, and they wanted to bid on the building because they wanted to use it as a brewery. Perfect for a brewery.
What's a brewery?
They
Making beer. And so what happened was Godfrey went there, he knew he had an X amount of money to buy it, and when the auction happened, these 2 men got distracted who wanted to buy it as a brewery, got distracted. They were off talking about something. When they came back, Godfrey had already bought it.
Oh.
And they went up to the man and said, when is the auction for the building? He said, it's finished. They said, that can't be, we've come here specifically to buy this. They said, no, it's finished, and that man over there bought it. So they marched up to him and said, you bought it, we'll offer you double or more than what you paid for it. And he said, no, the Lord needs this. So God had these men distracted long enough for this auction to happen. And it took them 3 months to dismantle it and bring it back, and it lay in pieces under the trees on the other side for 6 years before they started to rebuild it, because they didn't have the money to do it. And they'd coated every piece of timber.
So are you just talking about that building down
Big
there?
green building, yeah.
The theatre?
Yeah, the auditorium.
Auditorium.
Yeah.
So was that a separate piece of land? Was it a park?
No, same land.
Yep.
Yeah, but the building wasn't put up, it wasn't completed until 1976.
Okay.
So when they went to put it back together, they couldn't find the coded piece of paper, so they had to just kind of wing it. David Bye, the man who builds these benches, he lives down in Carrington, he was responsible for putting it back together, and he said... Yeah, they lost a bit of paper. It used to be a straight-sided building, but you'll notice it's staggered now with glass in each little step back. That was to allow more light in, because it had been a picture theatre, and so they don't want light in a picture theatre, but in an auditorium you do. So that's why it was changed for that purpose. So 1976, that was dedicated by Whitey's grandson, Richard White.
Right.
Oh, Richard. Judy wants it.
There were some stables down in that area.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the history of that. What we're going to do now, folks, is we're going into that room there. So hopefully we can get the PowerPoint presentation before you need to go.
Better, babe.
You'll see in a minute. Now, see this garden here? That was completely overgrown about a year or so ago. And consequently, the two ladies come every Tuesday and make it as beautiful as it is now.
So this statue's not original or...
No, it's only added in the last 6 months.
Okay.
Moses.
Oh, it is?
He was a bit of a...
I was thinking it looked a bit like Zeus.
No, that's Moses.
But I thought, no, that wouldn't be Zeus.
I was pretty impressed with his guns. He's
Probably from shaking his fists at the Israelites.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you've got that other house down the bottom.
Oh, do you want to sit in the
anyone
middle
play
a bit more
drums?
funny? Right?
Does anyone coal?
Right.
We'll just stick the hood on. This building here, R.H.D. White built as his billiards room. This was a solid wall, and when Judy was growing up, this was a bedroom, and she spent many nights sleeping in here. You can imagine in here, billiards table in the middle, just have lights hanging down from above. It's all timber lined, and I reckon it would be a bloke's only domain. I reckon men would get in here and tell stories, and you know, men do when they get on their own. I don't think so. We keep that very much to ourselves. Now, just to get an idea of where we are, there you go, Andrew's got the pointer on. We're right there, and that island is the island that Ken Derry, the carpet man, owns now. They built a house out there, and he and his wife had their grandkids there. They just came off the island this morning. So you can see here, we've got the entrance to the Karua River. That's the village of Karua, the old Pacific Highway, the old bridge. And so you can see this navigable river all out here, toing and froing, taking food and supplies and sheep and all sorts up and down the river. So when you came up from Sydney, you came over the new bridge and back to Tahlee, through here, through Carrington. And there's the entrance out at Nelson Bay.
No, it's not. Like I said, it's not that one.
You go up here into that way. So when we're standing here looking past the island, looking past the island back there, you can see this side. You can't see up here because those points there are in the way. So in order to get there, you go up there and chuck a left and out through the Nelson Bay. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're doing well for time. We're going through a PowerPoint presentation. To give you an idea of where we are right now, we're in that building just there. You came in through here, and through the gate past this green building, and up here, Tahlee House, Boat Harbour, this little cottage down here. Why do you think we call it the waterfront cottage? Very good. You're listening. Very good. I'm impressed. That's that green building we've just been talking about. Just up in here, just out of shot, is the cemetery where A.B.S. White is buried.
So where is the development of the land that he wants to own?
Over in here.
Oh,
That's his land there. We kind of go up through there. That's basically a boundary. Yeah. And then we're up here, we go right to the top of that mountain and then back down. Our water supply, 2 big dams there, and that water tank there, which is just over here, that came from the RAF base at Williamtown. When town water was supplied to the RAF base, Godfrey went and bought the tank, and they brought it across the water, floated it across the bay, dragged it up on a low loader and put it up in its place. And it had a mishap on the way here. David Boyle was just telling the story recently, a little bit of a mishap, and had a big dent in it. So they partly filled it with water and dropped some dynamite down it and boom! Flew it out to get the dent out. Except instead of it coming out like this, it now does this a bit. But anyway, that's another one. A little bit too much dynamite. So that's it there. So the water gets pumped up to here, and that gives us our water pressure. So when we turn the towel, the taps on for a shower, instead of just dripping out, it comes out with pressure. Everybody say good day to Andrew.
Hi, Andrew.
Lander. Andrew Lander is our property maintenance manager. Everything needs to be maintained, fixed or constructed. Andrew is our man. So to give you an idea also of just the layout, this is the swimming pool, of course, and that's where the sea ospreys sit and have lunch every day on the slippery dip. That's our library, different accommodation. The Johns family were living in that place just there, just before they left. So when you guys came to visit them, that's where they were. All right, let's jump into it. This guy, Mr. Swadling, now this is back before the Australian Agricultural Company. We're talking 20 years after Captain Cook's discovery. So when would that be?
1798 minus 20, 1760. No.
1770.
Captain Cook discovered Australia in 1770.
1770, 1790. Yeah.
You're getting your
I knew my
facts mixed up
history.
there, girl. So you're not so smart after all, are you? So Mr. Swadling, notice he was a convict.
Snapped.
Mr. Swadling, a convict. These guys here are out for a bit of a paddle. And this is local, of course. Now there are a number of different Aboriginal tribes. Some of them were quite fearsome, some of the warriors, they used to fight a lot. But the tribe around here weren't so. They were quite hospitable people. They weren't fighters, they were more peace-loving people. Thanks, mate. When we see this young dude here, now he's out to get some lunch, isn't he? Going to catch a fish, cook it up, probably. My question to you is, if he's good enough to catch a fish with that spear, and the fish might be this big, do you think he'd be good enough to spear Mr. Swadling? Mm-hmm. He would be, wouldn't he? So if Mr. Swadling wasn't on good terms with him, Mr. Swadling's life was in trouble if all of a sudden this guy decided to spear him. But if you go to the next one, we'll see this guy, Mr. Swadling, was up close and personal with this fella, and he had a fairly long spear, and he looked like he's a bit of a mean boy too, doesn't he?
Mm.
So I'm saying to you that based on the evidence, based on the documents of the time, right around here, the relationship between the Aboriginal people and the European settlers were good. Not very far away, not so good. Lots of murders, lots of
Are there many Aboriginal tribes still around here now?
Yep. Yeah. In fact, Andrew and his wife Lamanu, who's Tongan, go in and share a lot with the Aboriginal people in Karua.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's a big Aboriginal population.
True, yeah.
So, what we've got here now is we've jumped ahead a bit of time. We're in the early days of the AA companies. We're in 1833, during the time that Captain Parry was here with his wife, Lady Isabella Parry. Remember the lady who had the twins? Mm-hmm. And here you've got these things. That's where the Aboriginals lived at times. They moved around a little bit, but they would stay in these. Now, does anyone know what they're called? Often called humpies, but their name is gunyas. A gunya. Now, there's a hotel in Belmont called the Gunya. It's a little bit bigger than these. But this is these gunyas here, very close proximity to a chair that Lady Isabella Parry would sit in. She would write and read letters. She would pray. She would read her Bible. Question: in 1833, if the relationship with the Aboriginal people wasn't very good, do you think she would want to sit so close to someone that might do her some harm? They would want her there, would they, if they didn't like her? So the relationship then was good. Thanks, mate. This became part of a canoe, we think. Might have been the extension to a gunya, I don't know. Thanks, mate. Now, Robert Dawson. Robert Dawson was the man who was selected in 1824 to come all the way out to Australia, the opposite side of the world, and do what the £1 million investment was all about. Select some land, grow some sheep, make a profit. By the way, you won't get much help when you're out there. There was a lot of opposition, a lot of politics involved. Robert Dawson, I'm ringing. Excuse me for a second. Fix that. Sorry, I should have turned that down before. My apologies, folks. He was the man selected, and I would say to you, I wouldn't have liked to have had to walk the walk that he had, because he was given no assistance, very little assistance, a lot of opposition, and he had very little to work with. A lot of this land that he had to work with was uncharted land that had there were no roads, nothing to help him. And he was only given 2 years, and all of a sudden, back in England, they made a decision that said, "You're not doing a very good job," and they gave him the sack. That's what happened. So Robert Dawson was here from 1826 to 1828. This portrait was done while he was here in 1827. When he was sacked, it was he wasn't very happy about it. He thought that he'd been very poorly treated and remained quite bitter for the rest of his life. He couldn't find forgiveness in his heart for what had happened to him. That's a sad situation, but that's what happened. Thanks, mate. This is the land. Now we're here at the moment, so you come out to the headlands, all the way up to Taree, out to Gloucester, down almost to Dungog, all the way through there. 1 million acres. Big bit, isn't it?
Mm.
Would like to walk around it. And they couldn't drive. Thanks, mate. This is part of the reason he was told that he was no longer required. This is the return of sick. So in other words, what the doctor had to treat people for during his time in 1828. We've got a couple of diseases here that come about for reasons, social reasons, antisocial, some might say. So documents like that, plus some documents from people like the MacArthurs. We all know of the MacArthurs. Sheep industry.
Yeah.
Well, MacArthur actually, John Jr. spent time here in Tahlee House during the time between Robert Dawson and between Captain Parry arriving. He lived up in Tahlee House for a little while. Fairly unusual man, quite an unwell man. And they sent this document over amongst others, and on the basis of those documents, because they couldn't pick up the phone and ring, they couldn't send a delegation out here, they get letters and they say, well, this is what's going on. And often it would be months later by the time the mail arrived. And the letters said, he's not doing a very good job, and they sacked him. Thanks, mate.
So basically, he's not looking after the people. He's not looking after his employees.
Well, the bottom line was £1 million investment.
Yeah.
A million reasons for you don't add up.
You're not doing
a good enough job.
And that was the reason they picked.
Yeah. Yep. This is the man who was chosen to replace him. Now, very quickly I want to tell you about him, because talk about a leader, what an extraordinary man, this man. Before he came to Australia, before he was selected by the AA Company to replace Robert Dawson, he was a navigator. He was the man at the time who got closer to the North Pole than any other naval commander, any other explorer in the history of mankind that we know of. Did anyone see that special just a couple of months ago that Billy Connolly did about John Franklin, when 120 men perished looking for the Northwest Passage?
Oh, I've seen something like that.
Well, that was 20 years after Captain Parry. And there was an expedition when he had a boatload of men looking for that Northwest Passage, trying to get to the North Pole, and they were stuck in the ice. Now, you know how kids that you're taught at school, the Earth spins around and then in the seasons it tilts? Well, during the northern winter, the North Pole is tilted so far over that it doesn't get any daylight. Yeah. And so for 24 hours of the day, for 6 months of the year, darkness, perpetual darkness. Then it tilts the other way, and 24 hours a day, full light. But for 10 months, that ship was stuck in the ice. 6 of those 10 months in total darkness. They had no idea whether they'd ever get out. So under his leadership, under Captain Parry's leadership, those men on that ship did survive. They did find their way back. They didn't die of malnutrition. He was able to keep them sane. He educated some of the men during those long dark hours, taught them to read and write, and also he taught a lot of them about faith, about having a personal relationship with Christ. So eventually they were able to dig their way out of the ice, and actually they had to saw their way out of the ice and they managed to sail back to England and got back to their family and their loved ones. So you would have thought, wouldn't you, after getting away with that, the last thing you would ever do is put yourself in that position again. But you know what happened? Because the expedition at that point hadn't been successful, they decided to go again. And Captain Parry asked for volunteers, and every single man who'd been on that previous expedition said, under your leadership, we'll go a second time. What an amazing statement of trust and faith in his leadership. So, off they went again. So when a replacement was sought, this highly decorated man, he was selected. And out he came. A very heavily pregnant wife on the voyage. She hadn't had an ultrasound. And as I say, she had twins. And Lady Darling, Governor Darling's wife, who was perpetually pregnant, she had lots of kids. And the twins, Lady Parry, was quite unwell. In fact, they didn't think she would survive. And she only had enough milk for one of the twins, and Governor Darling's wife breastfed the other one. So it's a pretty close relationship. Thanks, Mark. This is something that he wrote before he came to Australia. Now let me read it to you. It says, I conceive true faith to consist in so strong and practical belief in all the truths of the gospel as to make the gospel the only rule of conduct. He said, I believe it to be that principle which makes a man throw off all his self-dependence and come in deepest humility to Christ as his Saviour, renouncing all pretensions to merit of his own and trusting to the free mercy of God. And that's a bit of a bold statement, isn't it? That's a bit of a statement of faith. You might go, yeah, fair enough. But have a read of the third paragraph, and it puts it into some context that would shake most of us to our bootstraps. He wrote that after the death of their first child, just on 12 months old, and the death of their second child, 1 week old, 5 weeks apart. So you imagine what parent, after losing two precious kids in the space of 5 weeks, two little ones in the space of 5 weeks, could turn around and say, make a statement like that. An outstanding man of faith. So they chose well, didn't they? And ultimately he turned a £1 million investment that was going very, very badly into ultimately the success that it is today. Largely because of the work of he and his wife. Thanks, mate. This is Tahlee as it was in those days. Now notice the wing hadn't been added on this end. Notice the bamboo's not there. Cottages that the stonemason was in. This was Daniel Ivy's, and this one was Mr. Jones. This is the boat harbour and a little boat shed that Captain Parry had built for his wife so he could take the kids down and have a little paddle on the edge of the water. A cottage down where there's a cottage there today, which was a rebuilt cottage from that original site. So it looks a little bit different to how it does today, but you can see, can't you, that it was quite grand even in its time. This is 1831 during the Parry time here. Thanks, mate. Now, Judy told me about this little toy here, and she said to me, Richard, I saw that when I was little, and I thought to myself, Judy, you're going a bit potty, because the numbers didn't add up. I thought, no, that had to be like 100 years old. She said, yeah, I did. This was the original Tahlee house before the fire. These are no longer there. Let's look out over that island. And here, in the mid-ground, there's some fruit trees. Now, of course, everything was consumed here, had either to be bought in from a long way off or grown on the property. And they grew a lot of fruit and vegetables and things here. They even grew grapes for making wine, hence the wine cellar. They couldn't duck down to the local supermarket and pick up a feed, but they had to be self-supporting. So that's a pretty amazing toy. We never ever did find out what happened to it, Judy, did we?
It was down under the old fig tree at Carrington for a long time.
Yeah,
I don't know what happened to it after that.
Be wonderful to have. Okay, let's move on. Judy's wedding day. You're bridesmaid. Bridesmaid, Jude, weren't you?
I was the mother of the bride.
You took the rounds on that one. This is, I was out at Stroud just recently and we went and had a bit of a look, and this is on the north wall facing internal wall of St John's Church in Stroud, on the side of the hill as you come into town on the left hand side. And it was in memory of the Parrys, because they, out of their own pockets, built that church. Magnificent church, beautiful stained glass windows, gorgeous. Go out there and have a look one day, you'll find it absolutely fascinating. And it's, as I say, it's a great legacy that they left. Later on, they were reimbursed for the cost of building that church by the AA company, because they recognised that without their faith, without the impact that they had on the personnel and the way in which they conduct business, that investment was pretty much gone. So that's in recognition. This is down in that cemetery. Now you can't read that, so on the next frame we've got what it says, but it's an interesting statement to make. Yeah, it says, what it says is, here lie buried such remains as were found of the bodies of Captain William Cromarty, aged 50 years, William his son, aged 16 years, who having left their homes on the morning of September the 13th, 1838, was it fine that day, Jude?
Sorry?
Was it fine that day?
No.
It was a windy day. Accompanied by an assigned manservant and an Aboriginal native for the Tahlee to share that good news. That's our purpose. Thanks, mate. Judy talked about this before, and there's young ABS. We don't know which one would be his brother, and I guess this is one of his sisters. And I guess that's RHD's, that'd be ABS's mum.
Yeah.
Jude?
Yeah, it is.
Notice that no electricity in those days, so hence those lights weren't there. But one of the things that is so, I find fascinating about this shot is that all these men, some of whom were the staff, the personnel who worked for them, they look very casual, don't they? And in those days, having your photograph taken was a rare thing. Not like digital cameras today where everyone's taking photos. It was a rare thing. So if you were feeling a bit uptight, it would show, wouldn't it, in your body language. But these guys are very relaxed. In the background here is an Aboriginal man who's standing fairly casually, you know. So it says to me that relationship was still good at that time, at that period of time. Otherwise, that man's body language would be very different, or he wouldn't be in the photograph at all if the relationship wasn't a healthy one. That's a fair conclusion to come to?
Yep.
Yeah. Thanks, mate. Back up in Tahlee House, notice the wallpaper, isn't it? Anyway.
Too much.
Too much. Here we are without the wallpaper, magnificent furniture. Notice there's the fireplace. In the previous one, the mirror wasn't there, different artwork. So he had the best of the best.
I've got that table now, see the one in the corner?
This one?
Yeah.
The octagonal one?
Yeah.
Is it a card table?
No, there's a card table to match, but I haven't got it. Richard Hughes has that.
But look, he's got just some magnificent
They're all
things.
hand-painted little things around it. They're beautiful.
Inlaid, is it?
Inlaid china
Beautiful.
pieces with hand painting on them.
Lovely. Thanks, mate. This is where we would normally on a tour go for lunch. This is what's called the Grand Ballroom. We call it the dining room now. Grand piano in the corner. There's this beautiful organ. You'll see a shot of it in a moment. Two massive marble fireplaces, white. This is one very similar to the one we saw up in the dining room in Tahlee House. Same colour, marble. Another mirror. Two huge mirrors. One fireplace here, one here. These chairs here, I'm told, came from the Westminster Abbey. So he had the best of the best.
John's got those.
John has
John has them, yeah.
Okay. Two marble fireplaces, more beautiful furniture. Thanks, mate.
Those paintings were in Ine's house. Those two top ones there.
Okay.
No, I've got that one on the right.
This one?
Yeah.
I go around.
Everyone's they've done a trick. Yeah.
I know.
That's that photograph we saw up in the one of the bedrooms. Thanks, mate. This is the boat shed as it was then. It's now replaced by a different structure. But you can see the trees are well established. All legacy of RHD White was his vision to have the vegetation planted. You'll see a shot of the wharf in a moment. Looking back that way. Large vessel. We don't know the name of this vessel, but about the size of RHD White's larger vessel. He had two. Smaller one you'll see a picture of, and this large one. Often people would come from Sydney. They arrive. They'd alight from the boat and be taken by horse-drawn tram up to their accommodation. That's the smaller boat, and that would often just spend time on the Port Stephens, showing people day trips around, giving them a bit of a show of Port Stephens and all the splendour. And the maintenance man involved in that one was, for a time, one of his Aboriginal staff. So if we go back, next one please, mate. Now there's that shot of ABS about to fire, probably the biggest rifle I've ever seen.
Oh,
How big is that?
yeah.
That's the big one.
Whose shoulder is he leaning on? His wife's?
No, that's
No,
why.
that's Whitey. That's ABS
That's
Whitey.
ABS.
Who's the guy behind him?
He died in that accident.
Got the recoil.
Yeah.
My goodness.
Do we know who that is, Jude?
I think it was a man called Mr. Fisher. I think he was someone high up in Sydney or not.
Did he have any front teeth?
I don't know.
But there's that plant in the background that we've
Yeah.
known. You can see it's well established there.
Yeah.
Cannons, 1, 2, 3, none of which are that one we just saw. We've got the bases of these that have been broken off, unfortunately, over the years, but you get a pretty good idea of what it was like. Thanks, mate. I'm moving quickly because of your time consideration. It's coming in from Karua, back up. Beautiful hedges. RHD had 11 or 12 full-time gardeners. We don't have only not one full-time gardener. So all our volunteers, we do what we can and we present them as best we can, but we'd love to have the luxury of 12 gardeners. That'd be awesome. Thanks, mate. Came up here. We're in here right now. That's where the grand ballroom where we normally have lunch. That building doesn't exist anymore, and Tahlee House is back there. If we come from the other angle, what we've got is, we came up these steps, the cannon was back here, Tahlee House up here. This summer cottage is no longer there.
See the house down the hill?
There, one?
Yeah.
Was that accommodation? Was that purely for accommodation?
I never saw it. Eno hadn't either. So it would have been would have gone a long time ago.
Wow. Amazing. So, folks, that's, again, what we've endeavoured to do is give together more and more evidence. We'll add them to that. But people, and this place is filled with people on a tour. They come in from Probus groups and retirement villages and all sorts of different places. And many of them are unchurched people. They're people who don't know about a personal relationship with Christ. And so we share the history, but we sow the relationship. That underpins everything that we do. It's a compelling thing to be part of. Now, you've been given the abbreviated version today. I know I've rushed through it a bit, but to respect your time and considerations.
We can get the rest from Judith.
It fills in the gaps.
Yeah.
But as I say, normally what we would do on a tour right now is I would hand over to a lady who comes in and leads people in the sing-along. So they're singing, what's it called?
What should we do with the drunken sailor?
Timey kangaroo dance sport. Roll out the barrel. We're bound for Botany Bay, singing to rely, singing to rely.
We then hand over to one of the staff, and Andrew's testimony is outstanding. I love to hear it every single time. Outstanding testimony. This man here, I know time doesn't permit for him to share, but at 10 years of age, he was diagnosed with having non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which was a
Hodgkin's lymphoma,
lymphoma.
which is more getting attacked, this sort of thing.
Yeah, and his parents were told there's no chance, there's no cure for this. And so you give the very, very abbreviated. It's now 1:30. We've got a couple of minutes.
Come on, Andrew.
I'm 43 years old now, so that was a long time ago it happened. Born in Ayr, North Queensland. My dad is a Basco from the north of Spain. My mum is English, Scottish, Italian, League of Nations, so I'm a half from the League of Nations as well. I was a normal young 10-year-old boy, or I'm a normal young boy. I'm the oldest of 3 children. I have a younger sister and a younger brother. And when I was 10 years old, I was limping, and my mum asked me, "What's wrong? You're limping." And I said, "Oh, there's pain inside here, Mum." She said, "I better take you to the doctor." So they took me to the doctor. The doctor done a check, and he said, "You've got a tumour in your lower right, left-hand groin." So I was admitted to hospital, Townsville-based hospital, on Anzac Day, 1975. And they operated, removed a tumour, diagnosed Hodgkin's lymphoma, and said more or less to my parents that it's incurable cancer. There's not much we can do about this, but we want to do some checking, see what we can do to learn about this disease, because it was a disease that wasn't really well known about even today. So they're still researching to find out what can be done about it. I was sent to Brisbane. Prior to going to Brisbane, my mum had a family friend who is now retired. He was the Anglican Bishop of North Queensland, who had a healing ministry. And Bishop John was asked to come and pray for me and anoint me with holy oil, which he did, and then he put me on the national prayer chain of the Anglican Church of Australia. I was sent to Brisbane and they started doing tests on me, used me as a guinea pig in many ways. Every day they took blood and did tests, did all sorts of weird and wonderful things that they do to people who are trying to learn about diseases. And in the 6 weeks I was in Brisbane, something started to happen. My blood went from being Hodgkin's lymphoma blood, which is all red blood cells and no white blood cells, it started to change, and I was coming back to a normal blood count. They sent me back to the Vatican, where my mum and dad live, and I was then going to Townsville to visit the specialists up there every week for a short period of time, and every month, and within 6 months I was completely healed. Now, the healing wasn't from man, because man wasn't doing anything. They were just trying to find out how to do something with it. So it was a healing from God. So as a 10-year-old boy, I kind of understood that God was a healing God. But I didn't have any relationship with Christ. I didn't really understand. I'd never heard a message to say you need to make Jesus Christ as Lord and Saviour. I'd been to Sunday school and heard all the good stories about David and Goliath and Daniel and the lions, and they're all good stories, don't get me wrong. I love kids those stories too. 13 years of age, I met a young girl, so I was only like these young fellas a bit older than 13, but and she lived where my grandparents lived, and Julie and I used to communicate, and every holiday I had I went up to visit my grandparents, which was 450 kilometres away from my parents, and spent all my school holidays with my grandparents so I could visit Julie. I started an apprenticeship in 1981, I guess it must have been, as an apprentice fitter and turner. I was still 16 when I started my apprenticeship. I finished year 12.